Like, let's unpack this. We're about to take a deep dive into what is, it's arguably the most referenced, most purchased, and most influential self-help guide on human behavior ever written.
That's not an exaggeration either.
Not at all. This text, this timeless handbook that has sold over 30 million copies, is essentially a shortcut to mastering human relationships, the art of getting along, and the science of gentle influence.
Right.
So our mission today is to extract these fundamental, timeless principles that work regardless of the century, whether you're navigating a business deal, smoothing out a tricky social situation, or just trying to manage things peacefully at home. This isn't just about reading a book, it's about internalizing the operating system of the human ego.
And it's so vital to place this text in its historical context to understand why it's so powerful. I mean, this wasn't some academic theory developed in an ivory tower.
No, not at all.
It was forged in the heat of practical, immediate adult need. Back in the early 20th century, extensive research was done. A huge 2-year survey involving the University of Chicago, the American Association for Adult Education, and the United YMCA schools.
And what were they trying to figure out?
They wanted to find out what adults actually cared about learning. What do they want to know?
And that's the key finding we need to focus on, isn't it? We know health was naturally the #1 interest, but what was consistently ranked #2 for adults actively seeking education?
It was the development of skill in human relationships.
Exactly.
Specifically the technique of getting along with and influencing people. People were intensely interested in how to communicate, how to manage conflict, and how to persuade others because these skills are just so directly tied to career success and, personal happiness.
And crucially, they weren't looking for these high-sounding psychological treatises full of impenetrable jargon.
No, they wanted suggestions.
They wanted tips and guidelines they could put to use immediately. Think about it. They wanted something they could try tomorrow morning at the office, or that evening at the dinner table. This direct, applied approach is what led to the text, making it less of a book and more of a practical training manual built on foundational human psychology.
Precisely. And this leads us directly to the necessary caveat, the ethical cornerstone that supports the entire structure of these principles.
Yes.
Because when people hear about mastering influence, they immediately think of manipulation, of some kind of cheap, surface-level bag of tricks or momentary tactics.
That's the trap we need to avoid. The source material is fiercely insistent that these techniques are absolutely not a substitute for sincere character. In fact, it argues that if the techniques are used disingenuously, they will ultimately fail.
Why?
Because people can sense the lack of authenticity. It demands a commitment to a new way of life.
And this commitment is what distinguishes genuine appreciation from simple flattery. We need to be crystal clear on this difference. Flattery, as the text defines it, is often just telling the other person precisely what he thinks about himself. It's designed to serve the flatterer, not the complimented person.
It's cheap praise. We even have that historical maxim to back it up, the one King George V reportedly kept on the wall of his study at Buckingham Palace.
What was that again?
Don't sell me cheap praise.
Right. If the underlying motive isn't authentic, if it doesn't truly come from the heart, it's perceived as false, it breeds cynicism, and it sabotages trust. The whole point of this deep dive is to show that success in human relations requires a profound change in attitude, where you genuinely start prioritizing the other person's perspective, not just faking it for momentary gain.
The principles only work when the shift is authentic and rooted in a desire to see the other person succeed. Okay, let's unpack the core mechanism. Before we look at any specific technique, we have to understand the single deepest principle that acts as the engine driving all human action. If you miss this, nothing else really matters.
Right.
So what is the central psychological driver for every single person you will ever meet?
It is the nearly constant, almost imperious want for validation. William James, the pioneering philosopher, he identified it as the craving to be appreciated.
The craving to be appreciated.
And John Dewey, the educational reformer, called it, perhaps more simply, the desire to be important.
We spend so much time thinking about basic human needs, right? Food, sleep, shelter, money, health. For most people living in developed societies, those needs, while sometimes stressful, are generally gratified enough to sustain life.
Sure, for the most part.
But this craving, the desire to feel important, to feel that your life is significant, that is often chronically neglected.
And that neglect makes this craving almost as powerful as the need for survival itself. It's the difference between merely staying alive and feeling that your existence actually holds weight and purpose.
There's a dramatic analogy the source uses to illustrate this point.
The one about food.
Yes. You would never, under any circumstances, allow an employee, a family member, or friend to go 6 days without food. Society would condemn you for letting them starve physically.
Of course. It would be unthinkable.
Yet we let them starve emotionally and psychologically. We let them go 6 weeks, 6 months, or 60 years without offering the hearty, specific, and sincere appreciation that nourishes the ego.
We feed the body religiously, but allow the soul to wither from lack of recognition.
And this neglect, the source suggests, carries a profound and sometimes devastating cost. The denial of this craving for importance is so destabilizing that some authorities have suggested that people may go insane precisely to find that feeling of significance in the dreamland of insanity.
That is a staggering implication. I mean, we really need to pause on how serious that is. The source notes the historical fact that at one time there were more patients suffering from mental diseases in the U.S. than from all other diseases combined.
And when doctors looked at the statistics, they realized that while physical causes like toxins or brain lesions accounted for roughly half of those cases, what about the other half?
The other half had perfectly healthy brain cells in postmortem examinations. There was no organic cause.
Which pointed to a psychological unmet need.
It's not just a passing thought. It suggests that the fundamental need for self-esteem, self-worth, and importance is so central to our functioning that its severe denial can shatter one's grip on reality. It's a survival need for the self.
And if it's a survival need, it naturally forces people to protect themselves, which manifests in this astonishing mechanism of rationalization and self-justification.
This is why people, even those who have committed clear, undeniable wrongs, even crimes, still feel justified.
I mean, look at the examples of notorious figures. Al Capone, the most feared gangster of his time in Chicago, he didn't see himself as a monster.
Not in his own mind. He maintained that he was a public benefactor, a misunderstood, unappreciated philanthropist running an illegal business that served a public need.
It requires immense mental gymnastics to execute corruption and violence while maintaining a narrative of moral goodness.
And he wasn't alone. Dutch Schultz, the New York gang leader who died in a blaze of gunfire, he echoed that same sentiment. He insisted he was a public benefactor right up until the end.
And this isn't just gangsters. Warden Lewis' laws of Sing Sing prison confirmed this human truth.
What did he say?
He stated that few of the criminals in his charge regarded themselves as genuinely bad men. They are human, and the desire for importance forces them to build these elaborate narratives. They will logically explain exactly why they had to crack that safe, or why their swiftness on the trigger finger was a necessity.
Leading them to sincerely believe they should never have been imprisoned at all.
Exactly. This desire for importance is a powerful lens through which we interpret our own morality. We see this even in the highest echelons of government, not just in prisons.
The Teapot Dome oil scandal in the 1920s is a powerful illustration of how justification replaces morality.
This was one of the biggest political scandals of its time. Albert B. Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, he effectively handed over lucrative naval oil reserves, Teapot Dome, and Elk Hills to private companies without competitive bidding.
And one of the recipients, Edward L. Senney, gave Fall a cash loan of $100,000.
Which was a massive sum back then. Fall was eventually convicted and imprisoned.
And the political fallout was enormous. But here's the psychological deep dive. It is almost certain that even as he went to prison, Fall had a perfectly logical, fallacious, or rational justification for the loan and the contract in his own mind.
He was likely telling himself he was a victim, or that he was doing what was best for his friend, or even what was best for the economy.
He was protecting his ego. The lesson we must take from Capone, Schultz, Fall, and the inmates of Sing Sing is that you cannot change people by condemning them. All condemnation does is activate their self-justification engine.
Right, it solidifies their internal rationalizations and makes them cling even harder to their narrative of victimhood or righteousness.
So if the craving for importance is this massive engine, then the key to influence, the practical way to operationalize that knowledge, must be the giving of sincere appreciation.
How does this translate into a real-world high-stakes advantage?
Well, let's look at Andrew Carnegie, the industrial titan, and his right-hand man, Charles Schwab. Schwab was paid $1 million a year, which was an astronomical salary, over $3,000 a day back then.
So why? Was he the technical genius of the steel industry?
Absolutely not. Schwab himself admitted that there were many men working under him who knew far more about the technical manufacturing of steel than he did.
Carnegie was paying for something far more valuable than technical knowledge then.
He paid Schwab for his ability to deal with people. Schwab's secret, the thing he believed should be cast in eternal bronze, was appreciation.
Appreciation.
Schwab understood that people perform not for money alone, but for recognition. He was a master at giving recognition, saying he was hearty in his approbation and lavish in his praise. This was the fuel that drove his highly skilled workforce. It wasn't about manipulation. It was about genuinely recognizing the contribution of every single person.
That's the difference between managing tasks and leading people. And the principle applies not just in industry, but in education and personal development. The story of Stevie Morris, who later became the legendary Stevie Wonder, demonstrates this so powerfully.
Right, Stevie Morris was blind. A typical teacher might focus solely on accommodating his disability, but his teacher focused on his strength.
How so?
Well, during a class, she realized a mouse had escaped. Knowing that Stevie had an exceptional sense of hearing, she gave him sincere, meaningful appreciation for that ability, asking him to help find the lost animal.
And that moment, when his exceptional hearing was elevated and appreciated, that fundamentally changed his self-perception. It wasn't pity.
No, it was the recognition of unique value. That moment of sincere appreciation marked a pivot point, allowing him to lean into his strengths and eventually become one of the most beloved and successful musicians in modern history.
It's just crucial we reiterate the distinction between this genuine appreciation and flattery. Flattery is easy, right? You just say whatever makes the person feel good, often based on traits they already acknowledge.
Sincere appreciation requires work. It requires you to genuinely figure out the specific good points of the other person and acknowledge them honestly and specifically.
That honesty is what makes the praise land and stick. You are recognizing something they may not have even realized about themselves, thereby elevating their self-image. That's why genuine praise can remain memorable for decades, long after the speaker has forgotten the exchange. Let's transition now into the foundational principles for managing interactions, the rules of engagement that build goodwill and minimize conflict. We start with Principle 1, which, as we've seen, is the logical counterpoint to that self-justification engine. Avoid criticism, condemnation, and complaint.
It seems so obvious, yet it is almost universally the hardest principle to follow, because criticism is the fastest way to vent our own frustration.
It feels good in the moment.
It does. But the source warns that criticism is something any fool can do, but it is utterly destructive. It rarely, if ever, achieves what you want.
Instead of correcting behavior, criticism creates resentment that can last for decades. It doesn't dismantle the recipient's internal rationalizations, it strengthens them. When you criticize someone, you are effectively attacking their sense of importance,
Forcing them to defend their ego by finding fault with you instead.
The ultimate exemplar of mastering this principle is Abraham Lincoln, a man under unimaginable pressure during the Civil War who had every right, and often the impulse, to criticize sharply.
He learned this lesson the hard way early in his life, didn't he?
He did, after writing a scorching public letter that humiliated a political opponent, which almost resulted in a duel. He promised himself he would never make that mistake again.
And we see that forbearance in action on the highest national stage. The specific high-stakes illustration involves General George Meade right after the massive Union victory at Gettysburg in July 1863.
Right. Lee's Confederate army was beaten, their offensive capabilities were shattered, and they were trapped at the Potomac River by a swollen river and the pursuing Union forces.
Lincoln knew this was it. This was a heaven-sent opportunity to capture Lee's entire army and end the war immediately. He sent these furious direct telegrams to Meade demanding an immediate attack.
But Meade, who was, cautious after the immense bloody cost of the battle, he hesitated. He called a council of war, losing precious days.
And in that time, Lee managed to build pontoon bridges and escape across the river.
Lincoln was, understandably, devastated. He felt the entire war had been unnecessarily prolonged. He wrote a scorching letter to Meade, full of condemnation, demanding to know why Meade failed to attack, concluding that Meade's failure was costing the Union countless lives.
The crucial, almost miraculous fact is that Lincoln never mailed that letter. It was found years later among his private papers, marked "Never Sent."
Why not send it? He was right.
Because he realized, even in his fury, that sending it would achieve nothing. It would only crush Meade's spirit, ruin his relationship with his commander, and ultimately Meade would have simply rationalized his hesitation by pointing to the difficulty of the conditions.
He practiced supreme self-control, choosing silence instead of emotional release, adhering to Thomas Carlyle's maxim. A great man shows his greatness by the way he treats little men. He decided that holding his peace was better than creating lasting resentment.
Okay, so if condemnation is out, what is the proactive, almost counterintuitive thing we must do when we are absolutely, demonstrably in the wrong?
That brings us to principle 3. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
This sounds simple, but it is a psychological jujitsu move. Admitting fault quickly stops all argument dead in its tracks.
Oh, so?
It instantly satisfies the other person's desire for importance. They don't have to fight to prove they were right. Paradoxically, it inspires them to become more fair-minded and generous.
The author provides a detailed, very relatable anecdote about being caught in the wrong by a mounted policeman.
Ah, the story about the dog.
Exactly. The author was walking his unleashed dog in a park, clearly violating park law. The policeman, seeing the violation, was clearly itching to assert his authority and reprimand the lawbreaker.
So the author, instead of arguing or rationalizing, he cuts him off immediately. He admitted, quickly, openly, and with enthusiasm, that he was absolutely wrong and you have caught me red-handed. He even said he was embarrassed because he knew the law.
The effect was instant and profound. The policeman's aggression just dissolved because his need for authority and importance was immediately satisfied by the author's self-condemnation.
The policeman completely changed his tune, adopting a magnanimous, protective attitude. He ended up telling the author to simply run the dog over the hill where he couldn't see them and they would both forget the incident.
And had the author argued,
he would have certainly gotten a ticket and the whole confrontation would have intensified.
This principle isn't just for small park infractions. It applies to catastrophic failure, too. Think about Robert E. Lee after the utter disaster of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg.
He had just lost thousands of men in a failed frontal assault. He could have easily blamed the failure on his subordinate commanders, but he didn't.
No, he rode out alone to meet his beaten troops as they retreated, taking full, immediate responsibility. All this has been my fault. I and I alone have lost this battle.
That admission of error, that quick and emphatic acceptance of blame, is the ultimate act of courageous leadership and preserved the loyalty and morale of his defeated army.
So, moving from conflict avoidance to relationship building, we arrive at principle 4. Begin in a friendly way. This is about setting the emotional tone for any interaction, especially when conflict might be anticipated.
It's the simple wisdom of the fable of the sun and the wind, demonstrating that gentleness and friendliness were always stronger than fury and force.
If you approach a situation with hostility, you simply invite the other side to dig in and defend themselves. If you approach with friendliness, the defenses naturally lower.
John D. Rockefeller Jr. employed this principle masterfully when dealing with the striking Colorado miners. The situation was explosive, the air was thick with hatred, and violence had already erupted. Rockefeller, the owner, was the enemy incarnate.
So instead of flying in and delivering demands, he spent weeks meeting with the miners' families, attending their social events, and just making friends first.
By the time he actually addressed the representatives of the employees and officers, the emotional atmosphere was already diffused.
His address was a masterpiece of tact and friendly positioning. He didn't start with demands or legal facts. He positioned himself as intimately associated with both the officers and stockholders and the employees. He said, "I'm not an officer, nor am I one of the employees. I represent the stockholders and the directors."
This friendly, empathetic approach, established before any facts were presented, just calmed the entire situation. He laid out the case so gently and fairly that the strikers, responding to his goodwill, agreed to go back to work without even raising the issue of wage increases they had so violently fought for.
Gentleness worked where fury had failed.
So once you've established that friendly, cooperative environment, the next step is strategic conversation. Principle 5. Get the other person saying, yes, yes, immediately.
This is essentially tactical agreement, the Socratic method applied to persuasion.
The strategy is to completely avoid controversial points at the outset. Instead, you focus on identifying undeniable points of agreement and generating a series of affirmative answers. This is a profound psychological move.
Why? What does it do?
Once a person says yes repeatedly, their entire physiological system is moving in an agreeable, forward-looking direction. Their mental machinery becomes aligned with assent, making it psychologically difficult to pivot to a negative answer later on.
The source illustrates this with the young bank officer who needed sensitive next-of-kin information from a client. The client was suspicious and resistant to providing personal details to the bank.
So the officer resolved to use horse sense and focus the conversation entirely on the client's self-interest, not the bank's needs.
He started by agreeing with the client, didn't he? He said, "You're absolutely right. This information is not strictly necessary for the day-to-day operation of your account." He validated the client's initial position.
Then he shifted. But let me ask you this. Suppose you passed away suddenly and you had funds here. Wouldn't you want the bank to be able to transfer those funds to your proper next of kin without error or delay? The client had to say.
Yes, of course.
He followed up with a strategic question. Don't you think it would be a good idea, then, to provide us with the name of your next of kin so that, in the event of your death, we could carry out your wishes smoothly and efficiently?
By the time the client said yes, again, his attitude had completely flipped. He realized the request was a protective measure for his benefit and legacy.
And he not only gave the information, but opened an additional trust account, guided gently to the desired conclusion because the entire interaction was framed around his self-interest and his desire for control.
We've established the strategic framework for avoiding conflict and setting a friendly tone. Now let's focus on the relationship toolkit, the simple, almost instinctual behaviors that make you instantly connect with and matter to other people. We start with principle 2, smile.
A smile seems so trivial, a momentary twitch of the facial muscles. But it is a universal language. It is the cheapest, easiest way to communicate positive intent.
There's some science behind this, too. Professor James V. McConnell, a highly respected psychologist at the University of Michigan, found that people who smile tend to manage, teach, and sell more effectively, and to raise happier children.
A smile contains far more information, and certainly more welcome information, than a frown.
The source offers a powerful, practical illustration from a cynical stock exchange participant. This man, fed up with his mundane life and interactions, resolved to make a conscious effort to smile at every person he encountered, no matter how brief the interaction.
So he started smiling at the elevator operator, the doorman, the subway cashier, even the cranky people he had to deal with when resolving complaints.
And he was astonished by the immediate and positive feedback loop. Everyone started smiling back. He found that adjustments to his day were accomplished much easier when he approached people with cheerfulness.
And he reported that this conscious decision to smile was soon bringing him dollars, many dollars every day. It's an almost perfect example of translating a simple behavioral change into measurable, tangible value in the world of commerce.
Next, we move to something that feeds the ego even more directly. Principle 3. Remember a person's name. For that person, their name is the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
This is a foundational political truism repeated through generations. To recall a voter's name is statesmanship. To forget it is oblivion.
And why? Because remembering a name confirms the person's individuality and importance in a crowded, impersonal world.
The best example is Jim Farley, who rose to become chairman of the Democratic National Committee and was instrumental in putting FDR in the White House, despite never having finished high school. When asked the secret to his success, he finally admitted he had called over 50,000 people by their first names.
50,000. That is an impossible memory feat for the average person. So how did he do it?
Farley had a system. It was something he developed while he was a gypsum salesman and later a town clerk. When he met a new person, he didn't just hear the name. He gathered details about their family, their business, their politics, their unique interests.
He consciously fixed those facts in his mind, often reviewing them later.
Right. And when he met the person again, even years later, he wouldn't just use their name, he'd inquire about the specific details, the family, the business venture, the unique hobby. This made people feel genuinely seen and deeply important. It's the difference between simple recall and true recognition.
Even historical figures understood the mechanics of this. Napoleon III, Emperor of France, had a systematic, almost ritualistic technique for memory.
If he didn't hear a name clearly, he would ask for the spelling. He would repeat it several times during the conversation, physically associating it with the person's appearance.
And if the person was important, he would write the name down immediately after the meeting, look at it, concentrate on the spelling for a visual impression, and then tear the paper up. He was leveraging auditory, visual, and repetition techniques to transform a simple sound into a solidified memory, all because he understood the immense power a name holds.
Moving from calling a name to providing a space for importance, we arrive at Principle 6. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves.
This principle directly addresses the dominant necessity of human nature, which William Winter identified as self-expression. The drive to talk about oneself is just overwhelming.
We have the famous study from the New York Telephone Company to prove it. They found that in just 500 telephone conversations, the personal pronoun I was used an astonishing 3,900 times.
3,900 times.
People are simply consumed by their own thoughts, feelings, and experiences.
So if you want to be recognized as a brilliant conversationalist, the trick is not to talk more, but to listen better. The secret to being interesting is being genuinely interested in what the other person is saying.
The contrast is starkly illustrated by two dinner party anecdotes in the source material. The first involved an Africa traveler. The author sat patiently, trying to engage, but the traveler talked for 45 solid minutes about her own trips and experiences.
Never once pausing to ask the author where he had been or what he was interested in. She simply needed an audience to inflate her ego.
Now compare that to meeting a distinguished botanist. The author knew almost nothing about botany, but was genuinely interested in the man. He listened patiently, sitting on the edge of his chair, asking engaging, open-ended questions about exotic plants, specific species, and even common potatoes, which were the botanist's specialty.
The author left that conversation feeling that he had met one of the most fascinating, intelligent people in New York, not because the botanist spent time listening to the author, but because the botanist was given the platform to talk about his passion for an hour, satisfying his deepest need for self-expression.
As Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler, the former president of Columbia University, once said, "People who think only of themselves are hopelessly uneducated, no matter how instructed they may be. Listening is the highest form of flattery."
And this leads us directly to Principle 5. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. This is the practical application of being interested. It's about focusing the conversation entirely on what matters to them, which results in an enlargement of his life for everyone involved.
This is the critical, proactive step. If you want to influence someone to do something, you must stop talking about your own needs, your own requirements, and your own perspective. The only way to influence people is to appeal to what they want.
Andrew Carnegie understood this implicitly, even with only 4 years of formal schooling.
Let's look at the example of the Shell salesman, Mike Whidden. He had a problem. An older service station manager whose station was filthy and disorganized, leading to dramatically declining sales.
And Mike tried everything, nagging, exhortations, warnings, and they had zero impact. The manager was completely unmotivated.
So Mike changed his tactic. Instead of talking about Shell's need for better numbers, he appealed to the manager's sense of professional pride. He invited the manager to visit the newest, cleanest, most modern Shell station in the territory.
The older manager was absolutely captivated by the modern facility. Mike didn't have to say a word. He had aroused an eager want in the manager, the desire to have a similarly successful, modern, professional-looking station.
And when Mike returned later, the station was cleaned up, reorganized, and sales had dramatically increased for both parties. Mike succeeded by aligning his need, more sales, with the manager's desire, professional pride.
Another fantastic example is Edward L. Chalif, who needed a major corporate favor, funding for 5 boys to attend a Boy Scout jamboree in Europe. Rushing in and asking for money for the scouts would likely have resulted in an immediate rejection.
Instead, Chalif researched the corporate president's background and discovered his passionate, specific interests. He spent the first 20 minutes of the meeting talking solely about those interests, the president's personal achievements and hobbies.
The president was delighted. Finally, he paused and asked, "Oh, by the way, what was it you wanted to see me about?" Chalif explained his request.
And the result was astonishing. The president not only paid for 5 boys and Chalif to go for 7 weeks, but gave him a $1,000 letter of credit and introduced him to all his European branch presidents for further networking.
And success came entirely because Chalif prioritized the man's existing interests, satisfying his ego first. We've built the foundation of goodwill and sincere appreciation. Now we move into the trickiest, most sensitive territory of advanced influence. How to change people's behavior, correct their mistakes, or assign new duties without crushing their spirit or arousing resentment. It's the art of indirect correction.
And this requires immense tact because, as we establish, direct criticism attacks the ego, triggering the justification reflex. The first principle in this advanced toolkit is crucial. Principle 1, start with praise and honest appreciation before criticism.
This is commonly known as the barber's lather technique. Just as a barber softens the beard before shaving, praise softens the recipient before the criticism is delivered. It acknowledges their importance and competence before suggesting they fell short.
We see President William McKinley employing this masterfully in 1896. A prominent Republican had spent weeks crafting what he thought was an incredible campaign speech, and submitted it to McKinley.
But McKinley realized the speech was completely unusable. He couldn't crush the man's ego, though, as he was a key supporter.
So McKinley didn't say this is terrible. He praised the speech's merits, pointing out its excellent writing and several key points, genuinely validating the effort. Then he subtly suggested that because it was so well written and contained such depth, it would make an excellent article for the North American Review.
By crazing it into a different category, an article, not a speech, he validated the author's work while indirectly suggesting it wouldn't serve the immediate campaign needs. The author saw the point immediately, tore up the manuscript, and wasn't resentful. Because his work had been acknowledged as high quality, just misapplied.
That leads directly to Principle 2. Call attention to mistakes indirectly. A direct accusation is a threat. It forces the person to lose face, which Antoine de Saint-Exupéry called a crime because it diminishes a person in their own eyes.
Think about Marge Jacob, a homeowner in Rhode Island dealing with messy construction workers. They were constantly leaving scraps and tools scattered, creating a hazard.
If she had ordered them to clean up, they would have likely resented the implication that they were unprofessional or childish.
Instead, Marge used indirect correction. She simply mentioned how proud she was of the high quality of their construction work, praising the visible craftsmanship. She then casually noted that all the scattered materials were unfortunately obscuring that beautiful work and might lead to someone getting hurt, reflecting poorly on their professionalism.
The workers, responding to the sincere praise about the quality of their work, immediately connected the scattered material to their professional image. They started cleaning up immediately, not because of a direct order, but because of an appeal to their desire for importance and quality reputation.
Principle 3 takes this self-effacing approach one step further. Talk about your own mistakes first.
This instantly shifts the dynamic from a critical lecture to a shared cooperative learning experience.
The author details how he corrected his secretary, Josephine, for persistent spelling errors. Instead of demanding perfection, he started by reflecting on his own youth and his own asinine mistakes with spelling. He emphasized that everyone struggles with certain words.
He then showed her his personal spelling book, confessing, "This word doesn't look right. It's actually one of the words I always have had trouble with myself. That's the reason I started this spelling book of mine."
By confessing his own vulnerability and showing her his corrective system, he made the correction feel cooperative rather than critical. She was now joining him in a mutual effort to improve professional image, not being scolded for a defect.
And her spelling errors dramatically reduced because the advice was received as help, not harm.
When leading large groups, especially in delegation, direct orders are often inefficient because they diminish autonomy. This brings us to Principle 4, ask questions instead of giving direct orders.
This is about recognizing that people have far more faith and enthusiasm for ideas they feel they discovered themselves. A direct order says, "I know best, you execute." A question says, "Your intelligence and input are valued."
One manager faced a seemingly impossible production order that required intense effort and creative solutions. Instead of issuing a terse, demanding order, he gathered his employees and asked, "What would you do to fill this order? What suggestions do you have that would help us meet this deadline?"
The effect was transformative. The employees immediately stepped up, volunteering innovative solutions and adopting a spontaneous we-can-do-it attitude. They had co-created the plan, transforming a difficult mandate into a shared, successful challenge driven by their own ownership of the solution.
Principle 5, a critical extension of indirect correction, is let the other person save face. This is fundamental to preserving ego. When you remove someone from a role they are failing at, you must do so with dignity.
General Electric faced this exact issue with Charles Steinmetz. He was a certified scientific genius, a key inventor, but he was completely failing as a department head.
They couldn't fire him or severely criticize him. He was too sensitive and too valuable. Harassment would have destroyed his mental health and his ability to contribute.
So GE engineered a masterpiece of face saving. They simply gave him a new, prestigious title, Consulting Engineer of the General Electric Company. This was presented as a high-level promotion that took him out of the frustrating managerial role he was failing at and allowed someone else to step in, all while preserving Steinmetz's dignity, reputation, and immense self-worth.
The next two principles deal purely with sustained motivation through positive reinforcement. Principle 6 is to praise the slightest in every improvement.
This principle is based on fundamental psychology. Abilities wither under criticism but blossom under encouragement. Think about the professional dog trainer, Pete Barlow. The moment a dog showed the slightest improvement in a trick, he immediately rewarded it with a pat, praise, or a piece of meat. Immediate, specific reinforcement works.
The human application is evident in the story of Keith Roper and the struggling printer. The printer was new, prone to errors, and rapidly developing a negative, defiant attitude. His supervisor was ready to fire him.
But Roper intervened, waiting for an opportunity. That opportunity came when the young printer produced one piece of work that was exceptionally high quality. Roper immediately went to the shop, pointed out specifically why the job was superior, and emphasized exactly how important that level of contribution was to the company.
Because the praise was specific and hearty, not generalized flattery, it hit home. The young printer's attitude completely transformed in days. He told his coworkers that someone finally appreciated his good work, turning him into a loyal, dedicated, and high-performing employee.
Sincere recognition focused on improvement is the most powerful motivator there is.
Principle 7 is a sophisticated motivator. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. If you want someone to perform exceptionally well, you assume they already possess the virtues and skills you are trying to encourage.
Henry Henke, a service manager, had a fine mechanic named Bill whose standards were slipping. Instead of reprimanding him, Hank called him in and employed this powerful appeal to pride. He didn't focus on the current failures. He focused on the past successes.
Henke started by emphasizing, "Bill, you are a fine mechanic. You have been in this line of work for a good number of years. In fact, we've had a number of compliments about the outstanding work you have done." He positioned Bill as an expert whose current behavior was a deviation from his known high standard.
By appealing to Bill's existing fine reputation, Hank motivated him to self-correct. The conversation shifted to a cooperative discussion. Perhaps jointly we could find some way to correct the problem. Bill responded to the appeal to his pride, correcting his behavior and returning to his high standards almost immediately.
Finally, when all else fails, or when a situation demands peak performance, Principle 12, throw down a challenge. This taps into the inherent human desire to excel, to compete, and to engage in the game itself, which is often a far stronger motivator than mere pay or threats.
Charles Schwab used this principle to fantastic effect in a lagging mill. The manager had tried every conventional motivational technique, coaxing, pushing, threatening, and nothing worked to increase production. Schwab visited late one day and simply asked the foreman how many heats the day shift had achieved before leaving. The answer was 6.
Schwab took a piece of chalk, wrote a massive 6 on the floor, and left without saying another word.
When the night shift came in, they immediately asked what the number meant. The foreman explained it was the day shift's output.
The night shift, responding to the inherent competitive spirit of the challenge, rubbed out the 6 and replaced it with a big 7. The day shift, upon seeing the 7 the next morning, felt challenged and pushed their output to 10.
This simple challenge, the engagement of the competitive game, rapidly turned the lagging mill into the most productive one in the plant, driven purely by the desire to excel.
And this principle works even for the most dangerous, thankless jobs. Governor Al Smith used this same tactic to get Louis E. Laws to accept the dangerous, high-pressure job of warden at Sing Sing, which at the time was notorious and rife with scandals.
Smith didn't try to lure Laws with a salary bump or easy conditions. He presented it as an almost impossible challenge for an Iron Man to reform the notorious prison and implement humanizing changes against immense institutional resistance.
Laws accepted the challenge and became the most famous warden of his time, implementing those very reforms. He was motivated by the sheer magnitude of the task, not the compensation.
This deep dive has covered a wide range of tactical principles, but let's synthesize the fundamental lesson here for you, the learner. True, lasting influence, the kind that transforms your relationships and professional trajectory, stems entirely from a single radical shift in your internal focus.
And that shift is this. The moment you stop thinking primarily in terms of what you want, your needs, your arguments, and your perspective, and start thinking entirely in terms of the other person's internal desires, especially that deep, pervasive desire for importance, your entire approach to communication changes.
Every single technique we discussed, whether it's giving praise, delivering correction, or making a major request, must be framed around their interests and their resulting benefits.
The insights from this source reveal a profound gap in formal education that persists even today. The course attendees often lamented that they were taught complicated, highly specialized subjects like calculus and Virgil in school, yet never taught the basic principles of how to deal with the people they would interact with every single day of their working lives.
They realize that personality, the ability to connect, and fundamental human relations skills are often far more vital for career success, leadership, and personal fulfillment than mere technical knowledge alone.
I mean, you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you alienate everyone around you, your ideas will just die on the vine.
We've seen that these principles are deceptively simple. Don't criticize, remember names, listen intently, smile sincerely, appeal to self-interest. Yet the source claims they are universally ignored 90% of the time. The difficulty lies not in comprehension, but in consistent application.
Which raises the final provocative thought we leave you with, especially if you are serious about transforming this knowledge into a skill. Since these critical behavioral principles are so simple but so often ignored, how might we structure our ongoing learning so that they are not just cognitively understood, something you read and agree with, but actively transformed into a new instinctual way of life?
The text itself suggests this requires unrelenting commitment. Reading the book multiple times, stopping to actively ask how you can apply each suggestion, reviewing the principles monthly, keeping a detailed log of your applications, and even making a lively beam out of it by having a friend catch you whenever you violate one of the core principles.
It demands relentless conscious practice until that sympathetic grasp of the other person's viewpoint, the willingness to understand and nurture their ego, becomes an instinct, a natural reaction. It's an ongoing challenge to be more genuinely interested, more appreciative, and more empathetic in every human interaction you encounter, turning knowledge into true mastery.
Thank you for joining the deep dive. We hope this deep exploration of human nature provides you with a foundation for lasting success and influence.